Good morning. My name is Clark Miller, and I'm a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society at Arizona State University. And in today's video, we're going to look at the question, how do people make knowledge? Or in other words, how are people involved in the processes of making knowledge? And so just to remind you quickly from our earlier videos, when we talk about knowledge, when we're thinking about knowledge management and knowledge analysis, we're really looking at the body of shared ideas and claims to truth that are produced and certified by processes of knowledge making. And so science is a process of knowledge making, but in our society, we have many, many different kinds of processes of knowledge making. So for example, we also make knowledge about elections by casting and counting ballots and coming up with vote tallies and determining who the winner is. And the winner is a form of knowledge. We know who won the election. So processes of knowledge making that occur within particular ways of knowing or knowledge cultures, right? So different ways of making knowledge, different forms and processes of knowledge making operate according to different rules. Right, so this is just a reminder of how we think about knowledge, right? It's about knowledge is about statements, shared ideas, and claims to truth, but those are situated within processes of knowledge making and ways of knowing, and that's where the people come in. So back to our basic question: how do people make knowledge? The short answer is that people are involved in a variety of different ways in every stage in the process of making knowledge. And so I'm just going to go through a few of those here today. But before I do that, I just want to highlight just from a couple of days ago, Biden administration appointed a new deputy director for science and society in the White House Office of Science and Technology by the name of Alondra Nelson. She's a professor at Princeton. And she said in her acceptance speech of this nomination, science at its core is a social phenomenon. It is a reflection of people, of our relationships, and of our institutions. When we provide inputs to the algorithm, when we program the device, when we design, test, and research, we are making human choices. It matters who make these choices, and it matters who they're thinking about when they do. And I just thought that statement from Dr. Nelson was a really concise and powerful illustration of why we worry about, why we think about, why we care about the fact that people are involved in knowledge making processes, because those people make choices, and those choices shape the outcomes of knowledge making processes, i.e. the knowledge that results, and therefore we need to pay attention to them. So when we think about the social process of knowledge making, we're really talking about a lot of different activities and steps. So I've kind of summarized here a process for thinking about research, university research, and the kind of set of social processes that are involved in knowledge making associated with university research. So the first is allocation of funding, right? University research is funded mostly by the federal government to the tune of $130 billion a year, right? So pretty important kind of stuff. And the first set of decisions that gets made is which research agencies working on which kinds of research problems get how much money. So the allocation of funding. And that's a decision that's made by legislators, people in Congress and their staff, also by the White House and the agency directors who propose budgets, right? And so that gets crafted in law, and then that money is ultimately appropriated to those agencies, and those agencies then get to spend it. But how do they spend it? Well, that's where you have to enter into the question of review and selection of research projects. And there it's program managers, right? People who are hired by these agencies to make decisions about which research will get funded. And they make it in very different ways. So the rules for review and selection of research projects at the National Science Foundation are different than they are at the National Institutes of Health. And those are different again from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, DARPA. Right? And so at NSF, for example, they select from proposals that come in from outside. But that's not the way it's done, for example, in a lot of other agencies. Right? It's done differently. But let's take NSF as an example. The question is then, well, what comes in? Because if it's proposals that come in from university faculty that are then selected from, how do those proposals get framed? Well, they get framed by the principal investigators, right? The researchers who think up what kinds of new research can be done. It's a bottom-up process in this case, in which the researchers themselves, but particularly the lead researchers of research teams, right? So lab directors, center directors, faculty, senior faculty, right? They frame the research projects, which are then selected by reviewers and by program managers for funding. Right? And once that money is then allocated to a particular research project because it wins this competition, then somebody has to conduct the data collection and the data analysis. And that's typically research staff, right? So graduate students, postdocs, research faculty, others, technicians who are involved in the day-to-day work of collecting data and analyzing that data. And then typically also preparing of publications, although that may involve the principal investigators again as well, right? And then that data and analysis that's written up in a publication, in a journal article, right, is then reviewed. So there's another step in the social process, right, where another group of researchers who were not involved in the initial research, as well as the editors of the journals, read those results. They critique it, they may accept the paper, they may reject the paper, they may ask the paper for revisions, right? And ultimately that results in some of the research being published, but not all of it, right? And then that research is then communicated and shared, right? And that's librarians, it's journals, and their journal circulation practices, right? So one of the big debates for the last, let's say decade, maybe more, has been whether research should all be open access, meaning anybody can get access to it no matter where they are in the world, and no matter whether they're affiliated with a university and that university buys a subscription to a journal, it just doesn't matter, right? So in the old days, journals were run by subscription. So university libraries would pay money to the journals, and then their researchers would get access to those journal articles. Well, now people are saying that's unfair because it leaves out many people in the world who either don't work at universities or work at universities that don't have enough money to pay subscriptions, right? And so the argument is that we should go open access. We should let anybody have access to these journal articles, but then how do you pay for the journals? How do you pay for the infrastructure that's required in order to circulate those knowledge claims, right? So again, matters who gets access to this knowledge, right? And so then somebody goes through those papers when we start thinking about how are we going to apply this knowledge. Say we're trying to make a decision in Washington about what to do about climate change, for example. Somebody has to select from all the available knowledge and say, well, these are the important bits of information that we have about this particular problem, synthesize them, put them together in some sort of a report, and then communicate that report to the people who will actually then apply that knowledge, make the decisions in the end, right? So we can see a whole series of people who are involved in the social process of knowledge making. In that process, they do a variety of different kinds of things. They design knowledge and they design knowledge making processes. They do work to create that knowledge, right? They get paid to do that work in many cases. And then they interpret and apply that knowledge, right? So we're doing different kinds of things in the human work that goes into knowledge making. And then finally, we can kind of think about the different kinds of work that are involved, right? There's imaginative work, right? The exercise of the imagination in framing research problems, in imagining new fields of research that we might fund. There's intellectual work that is involved in applying research methods and collecting and analyzing data. There is quite often physical work, right? So data collection might involve literally going out into the field and building or deploying data collection instruments and collecting that data. There's contributory work. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you're being surveyed as part of a survey that's trying to collect knowledge, you're contributing your information, you're answering questions, right? There's organizational administrative work all throughout this process that has to happen with people pushing paper of different kinds, right? Researchers have to get hired and they have to get paid, and grants, granting agencies have to run competitions where they have to collect proposals, they have to sort those proposals. Right, so there's all kinds of organizational administrative work. And then of course there's communicative work. We talk to each other a lot inside knowledge making processes, and after we make knowledge, we communicate that knowledge to others. So lots of different kinds of work in knowledge making. And just a reminder, right, why we care about all of this work, all of these different social activities that are involved in knowledge making, is because we're making choices. And the choices that we make and the ways that we work when we're making knowledge shape the facts and the truths that result. We get different knowledge out the other end if we do it differently. Thank you.